What's up, y'all? What's up, y'all? Welcome back to HRT. I am unbelievably excited for this episode. I have kept it a secret for a long time, so I'm excited that I finally get to share it with you guys. If you've heard of the show Transparent on Amazon Prime, then you're going to want to stay for a while. And if you haven't, I bet you're going to want to watch it after you watch this episode. But today's guest is the creator, writer, and director of the show Transparent, Joey Soloway. Joey is non binary themselves. And Transparent is about a transgender woman, Maura, who transitioned very late in life. But it's not only about her transition as a transgender woman, but it's also about, her transition in all aspects of her life and her family's life too. Each one of her family members goes through one of their own transitions, I guess. There's also some non binary representation in that show as well. You get to see how each of her family members copes and handles the fact that she's trans. And yeah, I've been watching the show every single morning during breakfast with my girlfriend, and I've been hooked. It's a really great show. I definitely recommend it. The show actually has won a Golden Globe, and Joey themselves has won 2 Emmys for the show. And not only is the show a show on Amazon Prime, but it's also a musical and it's going on Broadway in 2024 this year. So I am this is a milestone for HRT, and I'm so happy that I get to share it with you guys. And we also get to talk about Joey themselves and their gender identity and how they came to terms with it while writing and creating a show and all things good. And I'm just very, very thankful that I got to talk to them, and I couldn't have without the help of you guys. So thank you so much. I know you're gonna enjoy it, and that's about it. I don't give a shit about Patreon or Discord right now. Let's just go talk to Joey. Thanks so much, guys. Bye. Okay, so I want to talk about Transparent and the musical and everything else. But first, I want to get to know you a little bit as a person. So I'm going to do that by starting off asking you where you're from.
I am from Chicago.
Chicago. Have you always lived there?
I lived there with my family on the South Side until like middle school. Then we became North Siders as a family. And then, like professionally, we all went our separate ways. My sibling and I split. I went to the West Coast. Faith became an East Coaster. And my parents are still in Chicago. And I'm
Nice.
drifting eastward now. I'm in Provincetown right now and dreaming
Oh,
of
cool.
like a future out here.
Nice. Okay. So now, how was Chicago with all things trans growing up?
I mean, I didn't really know I was trans
Right.
until probably 10 years ago. So it was a different world. My parent is trans, so I'm second generation trans. But my
Hmm.
parent didn't come out until she was 70, and
70.
I was 40.
40.
No,
Okay.
actually, I was 45. So I
How old?
just like assumed I was cis until I was 45.
How old are you now?
I am 58.
58. I would have
Yeah,
never guessed that, to be honest
I
with
know
you.
because we get younger when you
Yeah,
transition start to go backwards.
that's very true.
Yeah,
So you came out as non-binary at 45, you said?
somewhere in there. Yeah, maybe later, maybe more like actually probably more like 50. I'm gonna say 50.
Okay. So now, when did you know you were non-binary before you came out to everybody else? Like, how long were you closeted for? I guess.
I mean, I now that I'm looking back on it, you kind of have to do the work of looking through your whole life and figuring out like what was essentially you and what was your transness. Obviously, I feel that had there been a way to assign me trans at birth, that would have been the best for me. And if I could
Sure.
have been raised non-binary, if I could have gotten that X on my birth certificate and be seen as both from the moment I was born, then maybe I would be able to answer that question, of like when
Sure.
did I
Yeah.
know? But that would have been, I think that's a humane option to give to parents
Yeah, I agree.
at birth.
Now, how was the process of like coming out for you? Like, where did it all
It was
start?
super duper slow. It was so slow. It was just years and years and years of being cis and feeling, but I feel queer, but I feel like a gay man. And like saying these things over and over again to people. I'm a gay man trapped in a woman's body, like saying it as a joke, writing it as my comedy voice.
Mm-hmm.
Come to find out, you know. But yeah, it took a while to really understand, you know, in our whole family, I like to say 3 out of 4 of us were in the wrong gender.
Wow.
You know, my dad was a woman, my sibling and I were boys. Who knew? You know,
Yeah.
it took my parent coming out to us when she was 70, and then like another 10 years, I think, for my sibling and I to both come out as non-binary and trans. So yeah, now everybody's trans.
I love that. Honestly, period.
It's a majority trans family at the moment.
That's pretty cool. Now, I mean, given that most of your family is trans, I'm guessing that the coming out process to them wasn't too bad. How did they take it?
I mean, it was actually funny. I mean, I have like a moment where I came out sort of to myself and to the world where I really knew. And
Mhm,
I had been working on Transparent, and, you know, we had been in a world where everybody was trans around me.
mhm,
And I had been just kind of really relating to the people who were non binary,
mhm.
even though at first, like, um, yeah, they felt so familiar to me. I was like, oh, that's who I would be if I would have been born now. If I would have been given that choice, like to have that as my gender at the age of whatever, 12 or 13, whenever maybe people would want to choose their gender, um, I would have been like that. That's what I would have been. And then a few years later, probably, it took trans people saying to me, like, Joey, you don't need an ID card. You don't need permission. There is no laminator. No one has to tell you that you're trans. You can just be trans.
Right. Yeah. The only one who's gonna know is you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It took lots of people saying that to me for years before I had like a moment where I was actually directing an episode of I Love Dick.
Mhm,
And I was getting, you know, as I was like doing my thing, I was getting a lot of ma'am, yes, ma'am, you know, as part of like working with the
mhm.
crew. And I was like, I can't do it anymore. Like I felt like I was in the closet and I was gonna burst. And so we had this way of starting every day where we would stand in a circle and kind of share,
Mhm,
because I was always bringing, you know, feminist circle based gathering techniques to being a filmmaker.
mhm.
And can you see this construction that's going on outside here? It's so appropriate for
It's
my
okay, it's
life.
not very loud.
Yeah, it's good background. This is the life out here on Cape Cod.
Cape Cod.
Yeah. And so yeah, I just like got on the box and I was like, hey everybody, I need to come out on my pronouns. You know, I'm non-binary, my pronouns are they them. I'm not a woman, so you know, no more of the she her, and you know, no more of the ma'am. And people are like, what, you know,
Right.
what are we supposed to call you? And I'm like, I don't know, boss. We switched to boss, or whatever, buddy, or however felt more comfortable to me.
Mhm.
And if ever since then, it's been like, as you know, a one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, trying to remake
Yeah,
who would I be if I had been this way my whole life? What part of me is shame from growing up in cis normativity? And what part is me, you know?
right. Yeah.
Luckily, you don't have to go back that far. I have to go back like, you know, 50 years
Yeah.
of
No,
another
that's very
name and
true.
another gender being like, what was me and what was, you know,
Right.
forced upon me by, you know, compulsory cis normativity.
Very true. Not to make you feel old, but I think you're the oldest person I've had on the
No, it's
podcast.
totally fine. I know. I can't believe that I'm a trans elder. It's so funny to me.
Honestly, though, I thought
I,
you were maybe like or late 30s, maybe early
yeah,
40s. I would have no idea.
it's the
Um,
impeccable hormone regimen.
right, right. Speaking of hormones, have you ever been on hormones? Do you ever want to go on hormones or no?
Yeah, I'm currently kind of. in my own, I feel like all trans people are in the business of being their own endocrinologists and own hormone doctors
Mm,
and cobbling together, advice from multiple people and creating our own
mm,
balance,
right.
because
Very
nobody's
true.
really going to do that for us, and there's no field, and we are the people who are kind of like making the tracks in the snow, so we have to take that responsibility.
Hmm.
And I'm like trying to perfect a non-binary version of me where I'm really like trying to be both at all times, and that I
Okay.
really want to be like utterly confusing to people.
You want to be
As
confusing to
Eileen
people?
Miles said, the awkwardness is the point of
Yeah.
the they them pronouns. It immediately,
Hmm.
creates boundaries around you in a room. People are either in or they're out, and it's kind of
Yeah.
a pleasure to move through the world that way.
Right. Yeah. That's cool. I had a guest, Cameron, who is non-binary, and they went on testosterone for a year, I think, or so. And after a year, they stopped because they
Mm,
hit that like sweet spot of like they were perfectly comfortable, with
mm.
people being a little confused in public and stuff. So that's really cool.
Yeah. And when they stopped, what happened?
Uh, physically, I think not like they were comfortable in where they were. Mentally, I think they did say there was some things to get used to, I guess, mentally, because when you stop hormones, a lot of things in your head, I feel like, get a little confusing. You go through mood swings and whatnot. But
Yeah.
yeah.
That's why I feel like the kind of non binary thinking can also apply to your own like self medication, because the first person, as I learned from friends of mine who were non binary and what they were doing, I had a friend who was just like using T gel, and they were sort of like, some days I want more, some days I want less.
Mm,
Some days I want to feel more, whatever
right.
testosterone brings. It brought me so much confidence. It's insane, like how much it changed me. And same, with friends of mine who are kind of on this journey going like, oh gosh, let's be gay men. It's
Yeah.
so much more fun.
Very true.
And,
Yeah.
it made me feel confident enough to do stand up,
Yeah.
immediately able to get to feel comfortable on stage.
Mm,
Um, it's a weird thing, and I just don't feel like people have to be either on it or off it. And same with estrogen, by the way. Like, I also want to be able to keep my skin looking a certain way, as
hmm.
whatever. I don't know what I am, a silver twink, you know. I want the right to be beautiful,
Right.
to age
Yeah.
beautifully. So I should be able to have estrogen too.
And people forget that non-binary people can also medically transition too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, there's no one way. Because I mean, I think you explained it as you more, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you want to feel more like both, right?
Yes.
Where
Yes.
where Cameron, I asked Cameron that, and Cameron was like, I think I want to feel like neither. So I
Interesting.
think there's so many different variations of
Hmm.
non-binary, I feel like. So that's really interesting, I feel like.
And also, I feel like it's both. Sometimes I say it's like both, neither, always changing.
Both, neither, always changing. Yeah. I like that for sure. Um Now I want to also ask you a question that I had in my mind, and
Okay.
that's not there anymore.
Okay.
But when did you know you wanted to be a writer and a director and work in filmmaking and stuff?
So I was always writing with like my friends and stuff my whole life, and they all remind me of it now, and I remind myself of it now. From a really young age, I was always creating stories with my sibling Faith, and Faith and I were gathering the neighborhood children into plays and putting on shows, and
Mhm,
really early on doing like this circle based, you know, let's all make something, let's
mhm,
celebrate, you know, putting on a
mhm.
show, like circus people, like theater people. My parents were doing um, like musicals. It was the 70s, it
Mhm,
was the dream. We were listening to the cast album recordings of Hair and Jesus Christ Superstar, and imagining ourselves, um, in the lead roles, we didn't
That's awesome.
quite yet know, that we had been like assigned female at birth because my mom was such a hippie and it was like a very transy time. Faith and I had like short hair, and Faith really was more or less a boy.
Mm-hmm.
The rude
Oh,
awakening,
interesting.
I think, came for both of us at like the ages of 12 or 13, when yeah, you start to go through puberty, you realize, oh, there's a difference. But we didn't really have like the mom who forced femininity upon us. She was totally comfortable with us being really non-binary. In retrospect, I look back.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so we kind of we raised ourselves in many ways as boys. I think Faith as a straight boy, me as a gay boy, not really understanding that we had been assigned female at birth. And I think that was the confusion in our lives. Faith coming out as a lesbian and me like never really feeling like the requirements of being a woman made sense to me.
Mm-hmm. That's super interesting. Because I relate to that so hard. I spent, till I was at least 14, basically living as a male, but and I didn't think about gender at that age. You don't think about that stuff.
Right.
Kids don't understand that. And whenever someone would make it apparent that I was born female and stuff, then I always remember getting just upset and I didn't understand why
Right.
until I knew
Interesting.
what trans was. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because you don't think about those things. Your kids
Right.
just
You
live
just
their happy
yeah.
little lives. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool though.
Yeah. Thank you
Um,
for sharing that with me.
oh, of course.
Yeah, it's basically when people start to expect puberty that
Right.
you start to have to contend with the expectations of
Hmm.
what you've been assigned at birth.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about Transparent though, and what inspired it. I want to get into that a little.
Right. So as I was saying, my own parent came out when they were 70 and I was like 40 maybe. No, I think I was actually sorry. I was 50. I would have been like it was about 10 years ago.
So you were
So yeah,
50
I would have been
when your parent
48
came out.
48 when they came out.
Oh, 48. Okay, got you.
And so yeah, I was a filmmaker at the time and I was really finding my voice as a filmmaker and talking all the time about the female gaze and what is the female gaze and what's the male gaze and just like where do you put the camera? What's the heroine's journey? How is it different from the hero's journey? Are there things that are essentially feminine about filmmaking or using a camera? So I was already obsessed with all of these questions.
Yeah.
I had always been thinking about gender, constantly thinking about gender, um, and yeah, I guess yeah, as you say, I was a guy all that time
Hmm.
and contending with I think the expectations put upon me by kind of like being like a gender clown. I was kind of like in this kind of like girl drag. I would wear like Doc Martens and leggings and like dresses made out of aprons, and everything was like a comment on being on femininity.
Mm. Hmm.
And that was like somehow I think how I got through life, like you know. And then always being like so awkward at any of the things where it was like women are talking about shoes now, women are talking about. I mean, but also I could do it. I could code switch.
Right. Yeah.
So it like led me, ultimately led me to a place of like, yeah, like probably most like a gay man who like wants to get his nails done.
So did you
Or a sweater
spend?
gay is how I identify now. I'm a sweater gay.
I like that. Do you think that in the start of your transition, a little bit, or your coming out, did you think were you? I guess did you feel more comfortable in the beginning as thinking you were a trans man, and then it kind of led into being non-binary, or did you know from the very start you were non-binary?
I needed to go through I went through every gender journey, like, you know, and needed to stop at each place along the way.
Tried them all out.
First from like, okay, my dad is trans. That was kind of like, I come by my queerness naturally. This feeling I've always had, this, thing that I would joke about, oh, I'm a gay man trapped in a woman's body. This is my legacy. Like, wait a minute, it's not
Yeah.
it's not a joke. It's like in my
Mhm.
blood. You know,
Right.
that's what, when my dad came out.
Mm.
So or sort of just like, oh, there's something wrong with me. Like this is who I am.
Mhm.
You know.
Mhm. I remember
So
saying things like that too. I'd
yeah,
be like, "Man, I wish I was a boy." Anyways, what's for dinner? And like, and it'd be like not a red flag to anybody.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're so lucky that we happen to live in this moment on Earth. Like I'm so lucky that my dad came out. And
Mhm.
that the results of that have changed the world enough that I can have a conversation with you and we can affect each other's lives. From just reporting in about like what it was like.
You think when your parent came out, was it? I mean, because it was. When did you say? What year was it when your parent came out as
It would have been
trans?
like 10 years ago, like
10 years ago.
92, 93.
Yeah, things were very different then. Surrounding the
Totally
trans
different.
community. Do you think you were you able to have like open conversations about it back then, or no?
About
Being trans,
transness.
yeah, yeah.
No, I mean, it was so weird. It was sort of like when my dad came out as trans, I really went deep into making a film. And I was like, if you're a woman, I'm a director. Like, that's
Mm,
what happened to me for years. I just went straight I put all of my energy into being a filmmaker and made a film called Afternoon Delight, which actually, if you look at it now, is really about being trans. I mean, everything I did is about being trans, but that's absolutely about the divided feminine, about a wife inviting a sex worker into the home to, have her husband contend with, the reality of the divided feminine in her
right.
home. Yeah, so it was right after that where it was like, okay, now I have to make transparent. And it was at a time where it didn't exist yet. And
Mhm.
so there was shame everywhere. I was ashamed to even tell people that this was true about my dad because it
Different
just
time.
was, you know,
Mhm.
I thought of it as cross dressing. It was cross dressing, as explained to me and my sibling at the time. And, now we understand the stages of what that means and how, Eddie Izzard, um, Susie
Mhm.
Izzard,
Mhm.
is a British trans woman. Um, my parent is a British trans woman. We grew up watching Monty Python. Like we were in a world where that's where our transness was, in
Mhm.
comedy and men cross dressing. It's like that's where it all existed. So when that happened, I wrote the show as a way to just kind of understand it and create what I call like a doll's version. When you're like, how long have you been writing? I was always like, I feel like people assigned female at birth are always writing. They're always, we
Mhm.
play dolls, we play paper dolls, we create stories. We're always storifying. Actually, it's like patriarchy that makes us think that actually men are better at telling stories or cis men are better at telling stories.
True.
But in fact, like we've been playing dolls like from the moment when we can and turning things into story. So yeah, I realized that and I wrote the script as a way to like come out to people. I sent it to my agent and I'm like, he's like, wow, what a story. And I'm like, yeah, it's true.
Was he like taken back by that?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I mean, I could, yeah. Yeah, he was, but I couldn't have like told him over the phone. I had to
Right.
like be able to send it to him and then like make sure, it just was so transgressive an idea at the time for me. I called certain friends of mine who I knew would like be able to kind of talk me through it. And, amazing people who, I've been like in the trans and queer community forever, so I never knew why. I never knew why I was in, because I was always dating cis men.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, just, figured it out and making the transparent pilot was just a way of figuring it out and like making dolls out of everybody in our family so that I could, I think, face it.
Right. Now, the show aired for the first time in 2014, right?
I'm going to say so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
what I read. It was
we got to
2014.
make just the pilot. It was a different like time and a different process. So
Mhm.
Amazon basically just like gave us the money to shoot a pilot and then they put the pilots up and there was like immediate critical acclaim, and so they ordered it to series. But yeah, things don't really work that way anymore on
Yeah.
the streamers.
Now, even 2014 was still, I mean, it's not like 2014 was forever ago. Trans people have been around for much longer than 2014, but
Of course.
still a different time than it is now. You know what I mean? Trans people or transness wasn't talked about or even seen in the light that it is now at all. So when the show did air, what do you think it was like for you being so seen publicly for being a trans activist and eventually, part of the community as well?
Yeah, well, I didn't identify as trans when the show came out, so I kind of like took on you know the deserving um, talk back from the community as a cis person, who this community experienced me as like a cis person using the trans world from my from my cis perspective or cis power.
Do you think
So
that
yeah,
like
that was a rude awakening.
yeah. Do you think, you know, if you had been non-binary when the show aired, do you think people would have listened to you like in interviews and stuff? Do you think they would have listened to you as much as they did as when
I
you were
don't know. I feel like
identifying
it's
as
like a
cis?
weird time machine question, that's almost
Yeah.
impossible to add. Like
Yeah.
I became non-binary because of the show, and the show almost like I worked on 6 Feet Under, back in the day, and somebody once said like 6 Feet Under was a show designed to kill Nate.
Mm,
He walked into that funeral home on the first day and had to kind of get into the embalming business, which is what scared him the most about his father.
mm,
And it was like 6 Feet Under was a show about a family inheriting, a funeral business,
mm.
um, and also inheriting like the big questions about death. And I think, Transparent was a show about like a family inheriting a legacy of queerness, when like in the pilot they thought they were inheriting a house.
Yeah, very true. Because the show is not. I mean, the main character is trans, right, Mora, and at first, when I first started watching the show, I was under the impression that it would be all about her and her transition, and it's not. It is a lot about her and trans people in general and gender expression, but it's also about how the family copes with it, right? And their own transitions as cis people and non-binary people even. And I thought that was really interesting, to be honest.
Yeah, Ari, I mean, my journey is all right there, I mean, everything Ari went through, um, Faith and I have gone through, and
Mm,
then some. We're so lucky that we're able to translate it into the musical right now, and Faith is writing the lyrics and the music for a Transparent musical, which is this kind of grand operatic, m- unbelievable musical version of like sort of what we're talking about is this question of like who would we be if we didn't have that shame.
mm,
And
yeah.
Ari travels to Weimar, Berlin, just like in the show,
Mm,
and meets their transcestor and kind of comes back with transforming what they felt like, was a curse into a blessing through song and
yeah,
dance
they sung.
on ice with socks
On ice.
and
I
wigs.
didn't know that part. That's awesome.
No, but
I'm
on Broadway, hopefully.
yeah. I I want to talk more about the musical. But first, and you might have already answered this in a way, but actually first, when did you come out as non-binary? Like, did you come out after the show was done, like after season 5 or like in the middle of the
I
show?
think it was when I think it was like between 4 and 5.
4 and 5. Okay. So since the show is based on your personal experiences and your experiences with a transparent, do you think the process of I know you kind of already answered this, but do you think that directing it and writing it and like even maybe watching some of the show back, like do you think you learned more about yourself?
Oh my gosh, so much. I can't even believe it. I mean, it's really quite a document. And I Love Dick, which was happening at the same time. Season 4 of Transparent, I flew from like, Tel Aviv to Marfa to film, you know, I Love Dick.
Mm.
And that was a really crazy time where Amazon was giving us access to money to be able to really like investigate the female gaze. That's what I Love Dick was. So I was like, there was no way I was going to turn down an opportunity to be making, filmmaking, even though it was such a busy time in my life.
Right.
But it came out kind of accidentally. I'm sure. I was like non-binary in my private life, and then there was some. I remember there was like one or two different like press things that happened because of the show. I think one was like on Fresh Air, and one was an article this woman Ariel was writing about me for the New Yorker, and I just changed my pronouns in them, and it was kind of a slow rollout.
Gotcha. Yeah. Because I can imagine like having, I mean, I guess through the podcast, I do dissect a lot of my past and like how I looked at myself when I was young. But
Yeah,
to your extent, I feel like I can't imagine like, you know, watching my life back in a sense. I think that's kind of cool.
yeah, it's definitely healing. I feel like when I'm like in in the old people's home, I'll just be like, put my show on again. I want to see my people. Like they're little
Yeah.
dolls of everything that's ever happened.
Mhm. That's pretty cool. Now, um, there's a lot of ways to go about trans and non-binary representation in the media. Now, with transparent, what do you think was like the biggest message for the world to know about trans people? Like, did you want to show that trans people are just normal people, that they're not, predators, like half the world thinks we are?
Hmm. Yeah, I think my first motivation when I first wrote the pilot was to make the world a safer place for my parent to exist,
Mm, hmm. Yeah,
which
I
felt
like
like
that.
this kind of Herculean task and felt like I was trying to like move the world, or move the planet with like my ability
Yeah.
to, if I could write fast enough,
Mm.
very Jewish, like Messiah complex, like I have to save the world, or I can change the world with my art,
Right,
or if I can, I must
right.
try. And I always felt like it was kind of my job to translate complex messages into like simple, really popular ideas. And I don't know why I thought that, but I definitely like thought that when I was a teenager and like made that part of my college application.
That's really cool. I think for sorry, when there was such trans representation in that show, even for 2014. Like for 2014, like as I said, 2014 was not as progressive as we are now.
How did you like encounter it how old were you when you encountered it, and did it affect your some people were like I had to watch it in secret, or I couldn't tell my family to watch it, or
Like when did I like realize like what
like
trans
did
was?
when you were watching Transparent, were you watching it with your family and coming out to them, or just kind of like
I didn't see Transparent in 2014. I recently found Transparent and then I reached out to you.
mm,
But I think because I came out in 2016, I think. Still times were different, but somebody had to literally be like, "Hey, like you're trans. Did you know that?"
wow.
Like, I don't know if I would have came to that conclusion myself in 2014, 2016. I probably would have by like 2020, but
Hmm.
you know what I mean? It was a different time, and trans people were still talked about a little bit, but non-binary people, for non-binary representation to be in the media in that time, I feel like is a big deal. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
And were we doing it then? Were we doing I'm trying to remember. Yeah, in
So,
2014, yeah, I guess we were starting to have people who had they pronouns on there.
mhm, yeah, and then I think you really get to understand what non-binary is in the fourth
Yeah.
season. So I think
And I
that was
think like
probably
one of the biggest
2016.
problems with non-binary and the whole they them thing is like there's not a simple word for us.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm a they them, or I'm a bothy. Like I'm always trying to make people laugh. Like,
Right.
hey, I'm a neither here nor there. Like, they're like, right this way, ladies. I'm like, I'm not a lady. I'm a they be. I'm always having
Maybe.
to like make a joke, which is fine. But I wish there was a really simple word. Like, oh, you're one of those. They, them, they. It's
Right,
just like,
yeah.
yeah, you just wish you didn't have to go through all that. So
Hmm.
maybe your generation can invent a good word.
I hope so. Yeah, because that's why I feel like sometimes it seems confusing to the outside world because it's the whole, oh, you only use they them pronouns for a group of people. Like, I don't know. I think you're right. If there was maybe a different word or something, people would understand easier.
Yeah, just to conceptualize. Like even for me, I was non-binary, but I didn't change my name until like 5 years into it. And I was always like really confused when people were still misgendering me. Even though I was using my old name, it just didn't make sense to me. Once you realize you're trans, like as you said, like the veil is lifted, you can't really go back. But it really didn't occur to me to change my name until I was like, I should probably change my name so that people will just kind of like it will help people to see me more the way I see myself. And then when I did find my name and when I started using my name, that's when like I think the exponential sense of who I was as a non-binary person like actually began to create itself,
Mm, I agree with you.
and be
Yeah.
like, oh, I am this person. Sometimes when I was doing stand up, I would be like, how do I know? I don't know. I went down to the DMV and asked them to put an X on my driver's license. Did you do that? No.
Wow.
All right, that's all I got. I did
Yeah.
it. I don't know why I did it. I had to do it the second I could. Like,
Right.
you know,
Like, I know I'm I know I'm a trans man just as much as you over there, you're a cis man. I know I'm non-binary just as much as you're a cis woman. Like, there's
right?
no like big, deep explanation to it sometimes. Sometimes it
Right.
is just the way it
Just
is.
is right.
Yeah. Do you think today, do you think there's enough non-binary representation in the media?
I mean, there's not in the least. I
Yeah.
mean, I think non-binary thinking in all ways is like the beginning of a revolutionary way of thinking. That
Mm.
whenever there are only two options, like three immediately goes to infinity. And like non-binary representation to me feels like okay, there would have to be as many non-binary people as there are cis men or cis women in television and in film. It would have to be for hundreds of years, before there
Yeah.
was enough representation. Non-binary people would want to feel like they grew up on non-binary everything, cartoons and non-binary Love Boat and non-binary whatever, sports and pageants and all of it, like for hundreds of years before we would feel what it feels like to be cis.
That's true. Yeah. Because I mean, off the top of my head, besides Transparent, the only show I can think of is Sex Education, which is a new show that has non-binary representation, and I feel like they do such a good job with
Yeah.
it.
Well, it's just there has to be non-binary creators, and then there have to be non-binary agents, managers. When you
You're
go to
right.
pitch your
Yeah.
show about a non-binary protagonist, chances are you're pitching it to a cis person who's like, it's not important to them. So, the whole world has to transform, just like in every industry.
And that's why it's so important, like for representation. Like, if I saw in one of my stupid little Disney Channel shows that I watched when I was little, if there was a trans guy in one of those shows, oh, it would have changed my world. Like, it
Yeah,
would have helped me out so much. That's why it's
totally.
important.
Yeah. Well, what the miracle is that like you helped me by me being able to see you. I'd be like, I can be like, oh, that's what I would have been like if I would have born now, if I would have been
Yeah.
born now.
Right.
But the thing that Faith and I are working on, like in the what it's all about, transparent, is this idea that fascism demands the binary, and it's the creating of the other that powers fascism. And the seeds of fascism are in binary thinking, in us, them. So being non-binary as a person, being non-binary as an artist, you're just kind of moving through the world upsetting a really important structure that people hold on to get through their day. And entire generations of men have so many sunk costs in the idea of what it means to be a man. They're
Yeah.
not handing it over. But one of the things that kind of I try to remind myself of is that there are trans Torah scholars who look back at sort of the time, before the Old Testament was written, or actually when the Old Testament was written. Um, and there were six genders. I'm sure you've heard this as a trans person. There was, two ways of being cis and four ways of being trans, depending on how you see it. And so the majority of people, actually, the minority of people would have been, cis at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, so we just have to imagine a world where the impositions of cisgender are an option that some people get, but that our transness, our non-binariness, we have to imagine it as a potential essential way of being seen and named from the moment we're born,
Mm-hmm.
because we went from six genders down to two
That's interesting.
as we moved into like a law culture.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I was gonna say through watching Ari in Transparent, a lot of my guests, they grew up with religion, and religion was the thing that made, or being trans was the thing that made them steer away from religion.
Hmm.
And I think religion, Catholic and being Catholic and Christian and whatnot, is for my past guests and even for me a little bit too. Like religion did not help my journey or my experience as a trans person. But watching Ari in Transparent is the total opposite. I think religion 100% helped them realize who they are as a person, which I think is a different and very cool aspect and a new thing for trans people. I feel like, even though it was in 2014, you know what I mean? I
Yeah,
thought that was
trans
really
people
cool.
can feel very, very at home in certain parts of the Jewish community. A lot of temples are really trans affirming, and is a lot of trans scholarship right now. There's somebody named Max Strassfeld who's just an amazing trans Torah scholar. You should have him on.
I would love to.
And yeah, just people who will blow your mind about this kind of stuff. And it's all the same. The Catholic representation of the divine feminine, still as separate from the Holy Trinity. It's really the same thing. It's the kind of um, objectifying of the feminine and creating like a sense of the divine around, the masculine only, the
Hmm.
masculine relationship with God.
Mm.
So like anybody who's part of any Western religion, Abrahamic religion, we all, got the same thing, which is the erasure of the feminine.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it, trying to change the narrative of it's a man's world in every sense. I feel like,
Mm.
yeah.
Well, like it could be, what kind of man? A man
True.
like you. Like I could hope so. That would be
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Right. I think so too. But you answered it a little bit before, but in the sense of like what kind of response you got from Transparent, like was there a time where it was getting a lot of negative responses because of the main character being trans and how the whole show is, not the whole show, but a lot of it is surrounded by gender?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the hardest part about it in retrospect is like all of this beautiful, important work was done,
Mm-hmm.
but it was done from a position of ignorance.
Mm.
Um, in me believing that a cis person's portrayal of a trans person. I mean, I really didn't even know what was going on when I wrote the pilot, let alone that I was trans. And I think I had a logic thread along the lines of like kind of cross dressing and feminine cis men, where I felt that Jeffrey was cis, but that I was portraying something that wasn't necessarily um, a familiar idea of trans femininity because I was portraying the sort of secret cross dressing clubs as
Mm.
a place where a lot of trans women began to find themselves. So that was
Right.
kind of how the logic worked in my mind, where it's like, no, it's okay that that this person is cis because I'm portraying that line.
Mm-hmm.
and it still wasn't, because I didn't
Right.
really understand the political repercussions of what it would mean for the average American to see somebody that they knew, like Jeffrey Tambor from Arrested Development,
Hmm.
in the role of a trans woman. They would continue then to believe that it was about this kind of costume, Halloween costume. So it did a lot of damage in that way.
I
And
think
did the
though.
good outweigh the damage? History hopefully will judge us kindly.
I think also through the show though, you see, like, in the way I perceived it, I guess, from the pilot to the end, you see how much you, as the director and the person who wrote it, you see how much you learned about what transness is. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think it does a very good job at taking you through the process of, like, I don't know, because even I feel like Mora at the beginning didn't know much about her gender identity either.
Right.
And you kind of learn with her, you know what I mean? And I kind of watched it. I tried at some points to try and watch it in the eyes of a cis person who didn't understand anything about being trans. And I do
Mm,
think it does a very good job at, like, kind of taking you through the process slowly with
mhm.
said trans person, I guess.
Yeah, and even Josh, Faith and I look back at season 1 and we feel like, yeah, Josh was actually so transphobic, I think, because Faith and I were. And,
Mm.
we had a scene where Maura kind of like slowly let her hair down in front of Josh and kind of like allowed herself to be seen as mom, with her sweater and her like, you know, we were trying to go from like ponytail dad, with two rhinestone earrings to, the dad. And have her kind of become herself, and it's a beautiful moment. And then Josh goes like right into her bedroom and sees like these drag performance wigs and like freaks out. Like it was
Hmm.
really trans misogynist in retrospect. And then Josh runs out, because he's just like can't believe that this is his parent. So we were
Yeah.
working out our own shame. I was definitely working out my own shame, and you know
Now, would you say that Ari was written after you?
Faith and I and all of the writers feel like everybody was all of us. There are so
Okay.
many of I find my own psychology in all of them, but everybody who worked on the show, the amazing writers who worked on the show, um, each and every one of them is like super brilliant and has gone on to create all kinds of content, including trans content. It would be amazing family tree to watch. But yeah.
Hmm. I because each one of them has their own transition of their own, as
Mm,
Josh being a cis man and Sarah being a cis female. Sarah goes
yeah.
through her own
What tell me
sexual
I want to
identity
what do
thing.
you what tell me what does that mean to you, like that each one has their own transition?
I think Sarah throughout the show, um, her character in the beginning confused me a little bit because I couldn't understand what transition they were going through in the sense or whatever. But I think at the end I realized that she learned a lot about her sexuality, like a lot, if that makes sense, and her
Mhm.
past traumas and stuff. Um, I think all of them, go through a very religious transition. I think
Mm.
religion helped all of them a lot. Uh, and Shelly too. I think she did a 180 herself with everything. I I don't want to spoil the ending actually, but the ending I knew she was still having feelings for said person at the end, and I was
Mm.
like, I knew it, I knew it. But
Mm.
yeah, I loved that aspect, because I think it also shows that trans people can force everybody else in their lives to look
Mm.
inward at themselves and realize they needed to do a transition of their own, if that makes sense. Because I relate to that hard, like hardcore. Like I feel like I came out as trans and nobody in my family, my mom, my dad, they didn't really know what trans was. And they didn't mean to be transphobic, but they were, they were by accident. And I think through time, the more they sat with themselves and thought about me, I think it changed a lot of aspects in their lives. I know it changed like what religion looks like to my mom. You know what I mean? I
Mhm.
think she was very much. In the beginning, I remember her saying to me like, God made you the way you are, like you're supposed to be this way. And I was like, no, like exactly. God made me this way. Sure, like, and this is who I am. I am
Mhm.
showing you how he made me. And I think that, you know,
No, like, exactly, that should be the name of your memoir.
yeah, I like that. Yeah. I think it did change a lot for the people around me. And I think
Yeah, so,
Mora did that
that's
too.
amazing. So her transition was to reacquaint herself toward her faith?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. And I think that Mora did a lot of that too. I think if Mora, and this is just my perception of the show, this is just what I think. But I think that if Mora didn't transition, I think a lot of her family wouldn't have either, and they wouldn't have made those
Mm,
milestones and things. You know what I mean?
for sure. I mean, so that's really, like, the logic that I think we began to thread together as we were creating the show.
Mhm.
So Faith and I, as we were moving into season 2, were in contact with, our own trans parent who was sending us articles about Magnus Hirschfeld and the work that was being done at the Institute for Sexual Wissenschaft in the early 30s, right before, the rise of the Third Reich. And so, forget the fact that there were 6 genders in the Torah, before, what happened around monotheism and law. This was a time where, um, queerness and transness was everywhere in Berlin.
Mhm.
And Dr. Hirschfeld had amassed a gigantic library of over 30,000 volumes of books that he had been collecting since the early 1900s.
Okay.
And so when people talk about the Nazi book burnings, and people are like, yeah, I know about the Nazi book burnings, what people don't realize is that the books that were burned were these books. They were his books
Ah.
about the multiplicity of gender. And so fast forward to when Faith and I are working on Transparent, and we're working with, a writer named Our Lady J, who is an absolute genius. She is working on a one woman show or Broadway show. She's just like, look her up. We were working with her, and she was writing an episode about Mora as a child. It was Mora, kind of, in her own mind, but also in a little league outfit on a field. And we all had this like big moment where she was like, well, we all would imagine, like, if there was no Hitler, if there were no book burnings, if we had all grown up with this idea that there are more than two genders since 1933,
Mhm.
I wouldn't have had to go through all this pain.
Right. 100%. It goes the same way of like in today's age too. Like if there was just more trans representation in Disney Channel shows and Nickelodeon shows, people
I think
today.
it's happening. I think it's going to happen. I think it's
Yeah,
slowly but surely happening. I
I
think
think so
it's
too.
just about moving trans people into those creative roles and those buyer roles.
Yeah.
We
No, I
have the
agree.
trans artists, but I don't think we have the trans infrastructure, like trans lawyers who really want deals to happen, and people who are really looking out to protect trans creators, like trans agents, trans managers. Like we're still at the very, 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 very beginning.
I wanted to say also that one of my favorite parts of the show is when you see Mora uh, kind of in her past and you see her presenting as a woman. Like you see her presenting as a male because that's how the world saw her, but the way she saw herself was as a cis woman.
Mm,
And I think, there's a part where like you see both reflections, like one was a male, one was a female. And I think that was a
mm.
very, very nice way and very knowledgeable way to show cis people what it's like to be trans. I like that a lot.
I appreciate that.
I was just squeezing one of those like stress ball things
And
and
it
the whole thing just
exploded.
exploded all over me. So if you see me like,
No problem.
doing weird things, that's why. But so my last kind of question
Wait,
about,
I wanted to ask you one more question. You said
oh
that
yeah,
your
for sure.
transness, your mother moved more towards a different spirituality. How did it affect your father?
My father wasn't very religious. I mean, he was, but he wasn't very like didn't talk about it very much. I don't think. He just looked at it. He heard the word trans and thought drag queen. He did not understand what it was like at all, and he was like, he took the excuse of like, I'm worried how the world is going to perceive you. You know what I mean? And that was his big thing. It affected our relationship a lot. But I think once I started hormones and he saw, me grow a beard, I had short hair, the world was perceiving me as a cis man. That's when he was okay with being around me in public, which hurts. But he didn't take it very well. But it's like he needed proof to take it well. You know what I mean? That's kind of how it went with my dad. Not the best story, but
But you said that like everybody goes through their own transition in a family. Like,
yeah.
do you think he
He
had to like go through a transition to?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think he's still in that transition. And, you know, just within the past year and a half is he referring to me with the correct pronouns and stuff. Um, but I think he just is more like as I think he's more just like I don't care anymore. Like my kid is just happy and that's all that matters to me, and I think it helps him see the outside world in not such a ignorant way, I guess, if that makes sense. I think
Mm,
he has more learning to do, but I know for a fact that if I wasn't trans, he would still be a very, close-minded individual. I think it definitely opened his eyes in a lot of
mm.
senses.
What town did you grow up in? Like, what kind of environment did you grow up in?
Um, I feel like for a lot of people say, oh, my childhood was like this, so that's why I'm trans. I had a very happy childhood. Like both my parents are divorced. They divorced when I was 5. Um, but that never bothered me. It wasn't like a traumatic thing to me. I really did get more presents on Christmas, so I was happy. uh, I had a lot of friends. I was in the closet as and I hate saying this word because but like identifying with myself, I hate saying it, but I identified as a lesbian for a long time, but I didn't tell anybody. I never like came out as gay or anything. I had girlfriends and I never told my mom, but like she knew, you know what I mean? Like she knew, like when one girl would sleep over every weekend or whatever, because I just never felt comfortable. There was no communication in my family at the time. And I think now that I'm trans, I think I opened that door of communication in my family. I remember being in middle school, like terrified to tell my mom or my sister things about who I had a crush on. Like I kept everything to myself. And I think when I was forced to tell everyone I was trans, it also opened up that door for me to be able to communicate to people, hard things.
Mm, yeah. And then it makes them want to also tell their truth. That's really what Faith and I are working on in terms of like the themes of this family,
Hmm.
who felt like they were cursed and really
Right.
find out that they have a blessing, not that they're
Hmm.
cursed, but that they're blessed. But like,
Hmm. Very
how does
true.
everybody have to tell the truth, on that process in their life to turn their shame into their blessing?
Very true. I have a whole episode about is being trans a gift or a curse, and I think a lot of
Oh,
people
wow.
when they first come out, it's oh, it's a curse. Like I hate being this way, and then throughout your transition, medical or not, you learn that actually it's a gift that I'm like this. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like you end up having so many skills and talents, and the way you see yourself, the way you know yourself is
mm-hmm,
so different from what how most cis people perceive themselves. You know what I mean? Like to be able not to get really deep, but to look in the mirror and like be like, shit, I know exactly who I am is a
mm.
huge thing. It's a huge thing that most cis people cannot do. And honestly, I think it's a superpower. I don't know. But yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely, I feel the same way. And it's sort of like, it's like the gift, the gift, what is being trans, but I didn't have the language. So for me, the gift was the language and being able to meet people
Mhm.
who were like, yeah, I'm both. And
Mhm.
then the language that was created in the trans community became an opportunity for me to be like, oh, right, I've always been this. Like, this is who I've always been. So, yeah, it's true. I do think the transness is a superpower. And I think it causes people a lot when they know about it. And then, like, I think when people don't recognize their own transphobia or don't recognize their own transness, it can cause a lot of chaos in the world.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of trans people start off by being transphobic too. Like I was so transphobic before.
Mm.
Okay, I mean I didn't like hate trans people or anything, but like I remember there was a person in the grade below me, but we went to school together and they were trans in high school. And I remember being like, all the kids were like, "Why is this person using the boys' bathroom? What are they doing?" And I remember somebody asked me, and this is before I was trans. They were like, "How do you feel about that?" And I was like, "Honestly, I don't care. Like, do what you want, but maybe like use the other bathroom." Like I remember those words came out of my mouth,
Wow.
and ever since then, I was like, what was I thinking?" Like, no, like that's not how it works. You know what I mean? It's all about growth in every aspect. You know what I'm saying? That's basically my whole point there.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we didn't have the language, you know?
Right. And all it is just talking about it. Like, you just get people to talk about it, and most of the time, it all you want out of it is to get them to think. If they still end up being transphobic at the end of the day, it's okay, at least you tried,
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
right? It's
That's
like
nice to want to do the emotional labor of trying. Sometimes I do, and sometimes I just don't.
yeah, no, it's not easy. It's hard. I think you pick and choose who you wanna educate at the end of the day. Some people, it's just like, okay, it's not gonna get anywhere.
Hmm.
Um One more question about the show itself. I want to know what were the best and hardest parts about directing it, writing it, all of the above.
Hmm. I mean, the best part was, all of it. The whole thing was just an absolute and utter privilege
Mm,
as a trans person and as an artist to have the opportunity to make the things I wanted to make and learn the things I wanted to learn and explore using like the principles of improv that I had learned in Chicago and the principles of like circle-based pedagogy that Judy Chicago brings to feminist organizing and bring it all to the movie set, bring it all to the film set,
mhm.
prioritize bodies over schedules and budgets. We
Yeah.
created a process that was feminist. Um, and every moment was an absolute gift. I mean, it was amazing. Both shows, Transparent and I Love Dick. Um, the hard part, is reality where you don't get to, write the words and tell people what to say and where to stand and have them do it again if they didn't do it right. You
Mm,
know, I
yeah.
spent like a lot of time making things, instead of living my life, and that
Mm.
was super fun.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. It's probably very hard, especially when I mean, I know not the whole time you were dealing with your own gender identity, but subconsciously you probably were. But I can't imagine having to write a show direct a show all about gender and then deal with my own and have no time probably to deal with my own gender
And
identity,
that's kind of what you're doing with this
Yeah.
show.
I guess, yeah.
You're
I
bringing
mean, I
yourself to everything you do.
for sure, I think, for me, I found out who I was way before this podcast. I found out I was trans way before, but through listening to everybody else's experiences and stuff, I still every week learn something more about my own transition, which is really cool. Which is why it's important to talk to people and like to
Yeah.
have other trans people in your life. You know what I
Even
mean?
old trans people like me. The oldie trans people
um,
from the Stone Age.
from the Stone Age. There's an ongoing joke in this podcast that I call my guests old by accident, no
Okay,
matter
really?
how
So
they are.
yes, add me to the top of the list. I think I'm oldest.
I've called like a 30-year-old old on this podcast, so I'm surprised I haven't offended you by accident calling you old.
It's all good.
um, Now I want to get into a transparent musical a little bit. So, at what point from Transparent the show did you know it was going to turn into a musical?
So Faith, my sibling, who maybe you can have them on one day. They're amazing and a total genius, or as their partner bitch likes to say, a genius. They're a total genius.
I love that.
Um, have been writing music and lyrics since we were little. So like coming back to that image of me and Faith, like as these little girl boys, having no idea what gender was, but listening to Jesus Christ Superstar and Hair and
Hmm.
Fiddler on the Roof and just dreaming one day of having our own Broadway musical. That was really who we were from like 0 to 10. And then I think we both got into the things we got into. I got into documentaries, Faith got into musicals. I was working in Chicago as a production assistant. I worked on that movie Hoop Dreams as a PA. I just like really wanted to be in the documentary world. That was my dream, was to be a doc filmmaker. And I'm working on documentary projects now, and it's still my dream. Faith went
Awesome.
into the world of musicals, um, and really wrote hilarious one-person feminist musicals in Boston. Like they wrote a show called Jesus Has Two Mommies
Hmm.
that like the Catholic Church came out and protested, and like Faith was always writing musicals. I was always, documenting things. And then when my dad came out, Faith and I immediately started making a documentary musical about my dad's transness.
That's
We
awesome.
not only turned on our cameras, but we hired a camera crew and began to make a documentary musical.
That's so cool.
We still have the footage if you can get, the demand to rise. Um,
Yeah.
and we documented so many things. We were writing songs in the chapel of the hospital where my stepdad was, in surgery. Like Faith and I think we're losing our minds to the fact that our dad was trans and having like a manic creative reaction and just like, this is a film, it's a musical, let's sell it. And Faith has this kind of like, you know amazing ability to write a song at any moment out of anything. Like Faith would rather be singing a comedy song than having a conversation. They're sort of like always in comedy music flow. So that was really the very first thing we were going to do. Then Transparent, the TV show, happened. And so we think like in some ways we were always heading to this musical because Shelley was always trying to grab a hold of the show and the microphone.
Hmm.
And she was always trying to make it her one woman show. And this musical is still her stealing the show. Hopefully you will come to opening night on Broadway, Cody, and you will see like Shelley still demands, these are her people on Broadway. These are her women. These
Yeah.
older women, and this is their night.
Yeah.
And
I love
More
that.
is played by an amazing trans woman whose Faith is writing harmonies for two trans women to be singing together for the first time in history. It's like, with Shelley singing on the cruise ship and then the musical as season 5, like we were always, since we were little kids, we were always on our way here.
That's awesome. I absolutely love that. And you said it's coming to Broadway in 2024, right?
That's the dream. That's the hope. Yes.
Awesome. I am so excited. Now, I do have a question here says where did the inspiration for the soundtrack come from? And I know that Faith
Yeah,
handles
you
a
got
lot
to have
of the
faith on
music.
here.
Yeah.
They're going
Yeah.
to be your favorite new
Yeah.
person. They're actually coming out here to
Oh, really?
Provincetown, and we're going to be together for New Year. So
I would 100% have them on here. Um, Now, what has it been like collabing with your sibling through all of this?
we've always been best friends and collaborators since we were little. Like we, are 18 months apart. We kind of feel like twins. And I don't write music. Um, I write, lyrics. I like to kind of like write dialogue. We both like jokes and comedy. And so, and again, like they were always more of a lesbian and I was more of a straight person when we thought we were cis. So we weren't really competing in any way ever about
Mm,
anything. They were really
right.
athletic. I was like, I love to read. So we're kind of just like these little matching,
Mm, yeah.
horoscope twins.
The
And
perfect like two halves make a whole type of
yes,
deal.
and so
Yeah.
it's really effortless to work together.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, I want to know how the process of creating, writing, and just working on a musical or a transparent musical was different from the TV show.
Yeah, it's like it's totally different, it's as different can be. It's almost incomparable in terms of processes. So like with a TV show or with a movie, I would write the script and then I would be on the set. And while I'm filming it and figuring out where the camera is, I'm giving the actors like maybe some new lines. We're improvising, we're learning as they're
Mm,
acting. I'm having feelings, I'm tracking my feelings.
mm,
I'm using the response in my body to give actors notes. It's like this incredibly alive,
mhm,
almost documentary improv street theater on a set, when
right.
I'm directing.
So did
And
sorry, go ahead.
so in a play, it's like I call it like a slow motion car accident. It's like a 5 to 10 year process where songs are written, scenes are written, stories are written, storylines are written, and everything gets weather tested over and over and over again for sturdiness in
Mm,
front of audiences and workshops and investors until like hopefully by the time we land on Broadway, we've built something that's so seaworthy in terms of everything, story and actors and song. And it's like a 1,000 layer lasagna dip, you know, and I am but one of 1,000 layers.
yeah,
And yet it is based on IP that I created. So
right.
as a
I
writer, I'm one of 1,000 layers, and as the person who created the inspirational material, you know,
yeah.
that's comes from my heart and soul. So it's awkward at times, that I have so much less control, but it's a
Right.
beautiful machine that Eva Price and Tina Landau are at the helm of, and they've brought amazing projects to Broadway. And Faith and I just feel really lucky to be on this
Mm,
journey with them.
yeah. I think that's to make something and watch it become so many different things. It has got to be the most that's like the dream come true. I feel like, you know what I mean? That's
Yeah,
awesome.
there's so much there, from this little project that was me going, okay, rather than like deal with my feelings, I'm going to play dolls about my family and write this half-hour script. And like the inability to sell it, nobody really wanted to make it, even though I had spent a lot of time working, at HBO and Showtime. I worked on 6 Feet Under. I worked on United States of Terra. I worked on Looking. I worked on like every show ever. But when it came time for me to do my own show, it was just, I think, too transgressive. And only
Mm,
Amazon was like the ones left standing, being like, okay, let's try this. So it was like 10 years ago. And it was considered like that, yeah, this might be a little bit too much for the American public.
Cause yeah, you said her name before. Where I said you worked with some really talented people like Tina Landau, MJ Kaufman, even
And
Miss
MJ and I are
Peppermint.
writing the book together. And
Are
MJ would
you?
be
Oh.
another amazing older trans person. Yeah, we're all old together. And yeah,
Yeah.
they're super brilliant and they bring like the knowledge of Broadway and theater that I know nothing about. Um, and they're actually a huge part of holding the lasagna together and making it all make sense
That's
for the
awesome.
stage.
You've worked with some really really cool people that I read about. That's awesome. Um, I
Sorry
want to
about the sounds
ask.
of my loud radiator.
You're totally fine. You can barely hear it. Plus, Max is a wizard. He could take anything
Okay,
out. Don't worry about
mix it out, Max.
it. So what's next for you, and what are you most excited for that you want people to know about?
Okay, well, the musical hopefully is like the next big thing. I'm working on a documentary about a neighborhood that Faith and I grew up in. It was a kind of like racial experiment in Chicago, kind of a little bit of like a modernist utopia. And I'm working on that with Monkey Paw. And that's a documentary feature that hopefully will be finished in the spring. It's called The South Commons Experiment. So yeah, we grew up in like a transracial and transgender childhood, I think.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
I'm excited to
Um,
see that. That's awesome.
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot behind it of like, what was happening with sociology at the time and how neighborhoods were um, being designed to, make people behave a certain way, be more tolerant, be more loving, be more willing to live in the melting pot,
Right.
the promise of modernism. So, the promise of
That's awesome.
science, the fiction of science.
Right. Cool. I can't wait to see that. Um, and I want to ask you maybe what's your final thoughts? Any advice for all the trans and non-binary people listening, if you have any.
Gosh, I don't have any. I'm becoming who I am from like watching all you guys on the TikTok.
Period.
I
And
feel like you're all
that's
free. We all had to go through the previous life when we didn't have these words, you know?
mm, yeah. And I mean, hey, that's good advice. Just keep looking for trans representation anywhere you can find it and learn from it.
Yeah,
It's
and like for
important.
me, it's like full time creating a trans normativity so that I can sort of just like feel the privilege of being cis
Mm,
and just reimagining the world, you know, if it existed in my image, like how would I feel and would I be ashamed? You know, would I be
mhm,
constantly dealing with the feeling of shame? You know, a lot of writers are always dealing with the feeling of shame. I think that's like what a lot of creativity is about.
mm,
Um, but the transness, I think, is just a lightning rod, you
mm,
know, right now. And I think if you're trans, even creating trans normativity with like a film, it's not just like when you say inclusivity, representation, it's almost like you're talking to the cis world and like demanding, include us, let us
mm,
represent us. But I'd rather be like talking to the trans creators and be like, you have a phone, you have your friends, you know. Faith and I were inspired by what Adam Sandler, you know, did, you know, watching just like cis comedy boys have a
mhm,
ball
mhm.
and film it.
Yeah.
And just you know, reminding ourselves over and over again to locate ourselves in that world where we're surrounded by people like us. We're safe. We're safe to improvise. We're safe to film it. And you know, that's art making. Art is love made visible. So make the art, you know, where you center your transness. Have like, you know, the self-respect to actually share it with people. That's the hard part. You know, have a screening, invite people over,
Mhm,
listen to their feedback, and then let things go where they may, but like create that situation for yourself. You know, I'm always, I remember actually that Faith and I, like when we were in our 20s, you know, I watched this like interview of me and Faith in our 20s, and I had like this crazy hair, and I'm sitting like with my legs like so man spreading, like I'm so clearly a dude. Um, but we were like launched into the comedy world at this moment, and like had this moment where we almost got hired to work on SNL. Faith and I
Mm,
went to meet Lauren Michaels, and we're like almost ushered into that world, you know, but instead,
mhm,
like it was just not the right place for us. But as a creator, you know, Faith and I have to kind of take all of that protagonism of all of those cis men who created what is comedy for me. So I have to take all of the protagonism of Monty Python and everything of all the men who've ever been on SNL, you know, and everything that came from SNL, all the
yeah.
movies that came from SNL. That's our legacy. That's me and Faith's legacy from Chicago. Like these are our people. But because we're non-binary trans people, we were kind of always over here.
Mhm,
So we have to kind of, I just have to remind myself like the protagonism, the comfort of just being like a cis guy comedian in his 20s who just thinks he's hilarious. His friends think he's hilarious. His mom thinks he's hilarious. He's always getting snacks and he's just like free to make stuff.
yeah.
And we have to like create that for ourselves as trans people in every moment to just feel the basics of being relaxed enough to like take risks when we make art.
Very true. Kind of falls into like the whole fake it till you make it. Fake the confidence and the confidence will just come kind of deal. That's what's gotten me through my transition, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, and yet we totally inspire each other. Like, I don't, you know, I have no idea like what it means to be trans and to be this age, you know. So I learn from you guys.
And I like what you said in the beginning there is of like you just stop like demanding things from cis people, stop demanding your representation, kind of just do it, you know. You want the art, make the art. I like that a lot.
Yes,
Yeah,
you have
that's really
to.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah, like nobody's coming over and like saying like, let me see what's on your hard drive.
right.
Like nobody.
Yeah, yeah.
They're not
I like
coming.
that.
You have to like, yeah, you have to put it out there yourself.
um, now, do you have a song that has resonated with you throughout your transition, or no?
Okay, you asked me that, and there are certain songs that I think of as trans songs. I don't know why, and I think of them as non-binary songs, and I don't know why. Um, and I swear it has something to do with like the going back and forth between the speakers, that thing that
Yeah,
people
yeah,
like to
yeah.
listen to. Do you know what
Uh-huh.
that's called? It's
Don't
like
know what it's called, but I know what you're talking about.
it's kind of like a version of like, yeah, like you can feel it in your brain. And there's a song called Misery by the Cat Empire.
Misery by the Cat Empire.
Like
I'm putting that in the link
Misere.
below. Yeah, I'm linking that in the description below for and I'm
Okay,
gonna
yeah, I
listen
don't
to
know
it.
why. I barely even know what it's about, but it feels very trans.
Feels
And
very
I like
trans. I
listening
love
to
that.
it.
I love that. Hey, I mean, like, I grew up on like High School Musical, and like one of the stupid songs about it's one called "The Boys Are Back," and it's like two cis dudes like being the most masculine they've ever been in their lives, but they're
Mm,
like singing, and to me that's like trans, like, and it
right.
makes no sense, but to me it's trans, so I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah, it's genderific.
I will definitely link that in the description below. Thank you for sharing that song. I'm excited to
Amazing.
listen to it. And where can people follow you?
I guess on the Instagram. I'm not really like making anything right now, so I'm not really participating or
Mhm.
promoting. I'm just kind of more in a writing mode.
Cool.
Um, I feel like when you're promoting is like a good time to be out there, like on the social media. But if I don't have to be, I'm trying to just like get back to my writing voice, find it, figure out what
Nice.
matters.
That's all that matters, is figuring out what matters.
It's so
Awesome.
trans.
It's so trans.
The logic of that is so trans.
Truly. Okay, so make sure you follow Joey at, is it Joey Soloway? Just your name?
Hmm.
Nice. Make sure you follow Joey, and make sure you follow me at HRT Podcast on TikTok and Instagram. I post videos every single day. Make sure you join the Discord in the description below. Patreon, subscribe to my Patreon. I'd appreciate it. You guys know the spiel, whatever. And I drop videos on here every Tuesday. Subscribe to me on YouTube and follow me on Spotify. I would appreciate it. And Joey, thank you so much for being on today. This meant a lot to me. This is definitely a milestone for the podcast, so I very much appreciate you sharing your time with me and
Oh my
opening
gosh,
up.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much for talking.
Of course. And I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much. Bye.